Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
Hello to you and yours, hoping you're having a great time wherever you may be. This is Dennis Rimmer here, the host of Talking Books and Stuff, and we need your help. We're looking for pledges. We're looking for people to be our patrons. We're looking for a little bit of cash here and there, maybe $5 a month or more if you can afford it, but $5 a month would keep us on the air. And we need you, if possible, to go to patreon.com/talkingbooksandstuff1 and pledge your support. I mean, $5 a month, that's what? 1 cup of coffee, maybe 2 cups, a fast food hamburger or 2, things like that, a couple of newspapers, 1 magazine. So if you can spare $5 a month, maybe a bit more, please help us out. That's patreon.com/talkingbooksandstuff1. And of course, the 1 is the number 1, the numeral, not the word spelled out. Okay, that's patreon.com/talkingbooksandstuff1. If you can pledge your support to help us keep our podcasts coming. We have lots of great guests lined up, lots more to come. So please stay with us. Thank you. And as Diane says, may all the good news be yours. Hello again. This is Talking Books and Writing and Stuff. And today we're talking about a bunch of books and writing and stuff with Nathan Burgoine. He tells us it rhymes with sirloin. So that's Nathan Burgoine. His latest book is Of Echoes Born. Nathan, welcome to Talking Books.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And first of all, give us a little bit of your situation right now. You're living in Ottawa, I understand?
Yes. I moved to Canada when I was fairly young. I came from the UK and I bounced around a lot. But when I came to university, I came to Carleton University and I just never left Ottawa.
Go GGs.
Oh dear.
Oh dear, yes. I know. I even know that it stands for Governor Generals, but that's where my brother David, whom you know, and I completely differ. He doesn't give a poop about any of that kind of stuff, and of course that's all I ever talk about. So okay, Nathan Burgoine, he's a writer, lots of books and short stories out. His latest is Of Echoes Born. It's a collection of short stories. We'll get into that in a moment, but first of all, Nathan, morning routine. Do you have a morning routine? Do you get up, drink coffee, read the paper? What do you do?
I am a very early morning person, partly because my husband tries to beat traffic by getting up early himself, but the main reason is we have a rescued husky. So the moment you start moving around in the morning, the husky wants to go for a walk. So I'm usually out the door and walking him by about 6 a.m. Oh. I'll take about an hour, and then I come back and put on a pot of tea. I'm not a coffee drinker. Coffee gives me headaches.
Uh-huh.
And then I'll get down onto the keyboard for an hour or two.
That was my next question. Is it coffee, tea, or something else in the morning? So you're
always tea.
Always tea. Yep. And is it beer, wine, whiskey, or anything else?
You know what? The same problem. I get really bad migraine headaches, and there's quite a few triggers for those, and alcohol is one of them. So pretty much the only alcohol I can have, and I can only have a little bit now and then, is either a dessert wine or maybe a cider. So I can't drink very much.
Okay, well, I'm on. David is on. My brother David knows Nathan. He's my brother David's also in Ottawa. He's the one who told me how to make a martini, and it's gin and more gin. So
yes.
You mentioned earlier that you were born in the UK. Tell us a little bit about that. How'd you guys end up coming to Canada?
Mostly my father's work. So my father used to, he was an organic chemist, and among other things, and he ended up getting involved with companies that dealt with precious metals. And so we ended up moving a lot to basically mining towns all across Ontario, BC. So very often we would move somewhere where he could drive to his job, which involved, sometimes it involved sort of turning a whole area of a mine or something around. Other times it meant realizing that no, it wasn't viable and shutting it down, which made me super popular among all the other kids.
Yeah.
and then we would move on.
Get out of town. Okay, we will. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sort of guessing something here, but you must have read a lot as a child then, if you were bouncing around a bit.
Oh yes. In fact, my parents were really strict about that. They had this thing where if we wanted to watch television, which I was a child of the 80s, so television was very much sort of this thing that was supposed to be rationed, and all of the great, psychology people were saying it was bad for your kid. But they had it in their heads that unless we read for 2 hours, we weren't allowed to watch TV for 1. So we had to sort of earn our television time. And like any kid in the 80s, I really wanted television time, so I read a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. I know. Speaking of television, I guess it's not a family secret, but when my brother and I were younger, he's a couple years younger than I, we lived out in the West Coast. We watched this show every Sunday. It was a bunch of gladiator movies. And the funny thing is, later on, I discovered that I was watching it for the slave girls. He was watching it for the slave boys. So we had that in common. We liked the same show, but for different reasons. So. But it's hilarious. He's a great guy. I love him dearly. And he's I don't know how he got to be so outgoing, but he just knows everybody. So, and when did you discover that you could actually put 2 or 3 words together and they made sense? When did you discover you had a talent for writing?
I almost had it squashed instead. I was quite lucky. So in university, it was something I kind of enjoyed doing for myself and some friends. I used to play really nerdy tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and some other games. And I would write up our sessions and turn them into little short stories. And that was fun, and they liked them. And I tried out for a university writing course. And so I submitted all my stories. And I'd been writing just for fun and for myself for quite a while. And basically the teacher told me that the professor told me that what I wrote was, let me see if I can get it right, was trite and common, and what was the other adjective? Anyway, it was 3 really bad adjectives.
Trite, common, probably derivative. They always like to throw that in there.
Yeah, no, I can't remember what he said. Trite, common, and something else. It's escaping me now. But but at the time, I was also working full-time in the bookstore. So by that point, I had come out. My family had stopped speaking to me. So I was working full-time and getting a course here and there as I could. So I was working full-time in the bookstore, and I don't remember when I had the aha moment, but I was selling something, and a customer made some comment about, they knew this was just candy, but they enjoy their candy, about some very popular novel or a popular author, and I realized that trite and common actually sold really well. So
right.
maybe I was taking the wrong advice. And as part of working at the bookstore, I used to read a lot, and I would write a lot of reviews. And I was lucky enough that when I started bumping into queer writers who were writing wonderful queer books, I would write reviews, and sometimes they would reach out and thank me for the review. And so I met some authors that way. And that's literally how I got my first shot. I had written a review of a novel called The Night We Met by Rob Burns, and he reached out to say thank you. And then he introduced me to some other authors because I'd asked him if he had any more books coming in. At the time, he didn't have any more, but he suggested some other authors. And 2 of those authors gave me my first shot at writing a short story for the first anthology I was ever published in. So.
That leads me to the next one. So tell us about the first time you got paid for something you wrote.
It was a blast. So it was a book called Fool for Love, and it was like the little book that could. So it was an anthology of gay romance short stories. And it was originally going to be with a publisher that ended up going under. So we all got accepted, and then we all got paid, which was fantastic. So I got my check. And then the publisher went under, so the book vanished. Oh. It never actually got released. I can't remember what its original title was. I want to say Moonlight and Roses, but I could be wrong. And then the editors, though, they just kept trying and trying and trying. They had these stories, and they found a new home for it. And I want to say it was about 2 years later, they finally got in touch with all of us and said, hey, we actually have found a home. We got new contracts, and the book was actually printed. So unlike a lot of people, I got paid for the first piece of writing I ever got paid for. It actually wasn't printed for multiple years.
Well,
but eventually it happened, so that was good.
Great. Do you have a writing routine that you follow?
I tend to do my writing first thing in the morning for a couple of hours. And then, honestly, I generally stop. If I stare at a screen for too long, I'll get a headache. So I will walk the dog, I will do other things, and I might sort of come back and peck at the keyboard a little bit now and then through the day, but I limit myself to an hour or two a day.
Now, I take it this is your, let's say, full-time job.
It is now, yes. I finally left the bookstore a couple of years ago. Once I got a contract for, I think, 3 novels first, and so I get to do it full time. Certainly, it's not lucrative. I don't want anyone out there thinking they should quit their jobs.
Yeah,
it's not. But at the same time, my husband was wonderful enough to support me, and also wonderful enough to realize that the day job was getting in the way of even trying to meet some of the deadlines, because again, I can't write for very long on a day. When you threw in a full-time job as well, I was really struggling to get the words out fast enough to meet the deadline.
Yeah, and let's back up a little bit. You mentioned in the foreword of Echoes Born, which I've only had a chance to flip through. I think it arrived yesterday, day before maybe. But you mentioned that early on, you were in high school, I think it was. You read a story about a gay character who died, I take it. Now,
yeah.
What did that do when you think back for like your development, I guess?
So I often try to explain when people ask me, what's the biggest thing about being like a gay person or any kind of queer person? And that moment always springs to mind. It's the fact that for the vast majority of us, and obviously this is changing a little bit as we move forward, but for the vast majority of us, we're just randomly born to people who aren't anything like us in that particular regard, right? So
right.
I had a very unwelcoming family. I knew that before I even knew anything really about myself. Like the dialogue in my home was very clear. So once I realized I was gay, that was a problem. And so you're very isolated. You don't really have a connection to a history or even a notion of there being a history or a future for people like you, because there's no examples, or at least not when I was young. So that story was the very first character I ever bumped into that was like me in that particular way, which could have been a really big moment. And instead, my teacher used it as an example of poetic justice because the character dies and dies horribly, explaining because they were gay.
Oh.
So it was just one of those, and no one else, I don't know that anybody else in the class so much as blinked. Right, because that just was totally in line with everybody's understanding of how the world works. But for me, sitting there at my desk, I was like falling apart, thinking, "Oh my God,
oh gosh,
I die.
I'm doomed.
That's what happens to people like me.
Yes.
I die." So that's why I started writing the way I do. I write science fiction-y kind of stuff, but it's mostly contemporary, speculative fiction. I think is the full term. But it's always unapologetically queer. And just because I would love for someone to not have to bump into such a negative character as their first character.
Right.
If that was the first time. So yeah, that shaped everything about me as a writer. I just want to tell the kind of stories that I wish I'd bumped into first.
And that's always that way, and I'm not trying to make light of the situation. Oh, believe me, I'm not trying to. It seems that like Canadian writers in general, it took a long, long time for a Canadian writer to see that there was other Canadian writers out there. They didn't all have to be American or British. And female hockey players, a long time before there was female hockey players everywhere. Canadian musicians, a lot of us old-timers in the broadcast business, a lot of them complain about the Canadian content rules, but you had to have heard other musicians do something and they were similar to you before you could actually move forward yourself. So
exactly. Representation always matters. Absolutely.
Right. Yes, got it. And it's hard sometimes for me to accept that because, I'm an old fart, but I'm coming around. I can be flexible. Speaking about writing, what did you learn the hard way about being a professional writer?
I think the hardest part for me, so I was pretty lucky. I mentioned I worked at the bookstore, so I had a lot of exposure to the book world. I knew how publishing schedules worked. I knew that things were months in advance before they actually happened, and then it was a whole bunch of sitting down and waiting. But I think my biggest surprise, and it really shouldn't have been a surprise, was how there's that lightning in a bottle moment or there isn't. So I mean, on the other hand of the counter, like standing behind selling books, I knew that some of the best books I'd ever read in my life just kind of fizzled and vanished off the bookshelf.
Yeah.
And that was just unfortunate. That was just the way it happened. Something else was larger. Something else made more noise. But as a writer, when you put something together and you're like, oh my God, this is the best thing I have ever written. I am so excited about this and nervous and scared. And then you let it out into the world, and it just sort of drops like a plop in the river, and nothing happens, and you're like, crap.
Oh,
and then
boy.
You've got to keep going.
Yeah.
There's no, you can mourn it a little bit, but the only way to promote a backlist title that didn't do very well really is to write a new book, or to write a new story. And, if people like what you've written this time, they'll go look at the stuff you've already done before. And that's the number one way to make noise, but it's really hard to watch it happen when you put sort of your heart and soul into something, and that one particular thing, for whatever reason, just sort of lies there and doesn't do anything.
Yep. And it's like your life blood, your life work, like you say, and then like 7 people read it and you go, oh my God, why am I doing this? Your first novel was Light, and it was a Lambda Literary Award finalist. Now, how did that make you feel? Like right out of the gate, pretty much, you get this big-time recognition. That must have felt special.
Actually, it was terrifying, and for the same reason. So again, working at the bookstore, I knew what happened to authors who, with their debut novel, win a major award in their field. Generally, their second book does terribly, because people compare it. And they go in with these giant expectations. So when I was nominated for it, and it was my debut novel, I was like, oh no. So I was really, really happy to become a finalist and not win. I know that sounds strange, but
right.
I didn't want to follow up. There's this thing called the sophomore slump,
yes,
where your second book,
yep,
you really struggle. And I'm like, I didn't want to add any pressure to that already. I was actually quite pleased not to win, as strange as that sounds.
Well, there's lots like that. I think of way back in the 90s, it was Snow Falling on Cedars was a big West Coast hit from because we lived out in Bellingham, Washington. So it was a big, and we never heard of the guy since. Pretty much. Right.
And you feel so terrible for these authors. Like, the book was beautiful, and it's not like the next books aren't.
Right.
It's just people have shoved their expectations so much higher. I'm like, oh, no, I don't want that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'd love to win something now.
Right. Oh, yeah. Me too. It's the curse of success, I guess. So, double-edged sword. You want it, and then you don't want it. Okay, what goes on in Light, if you can tell us in a few words?
Sure. Light is it is my sort of homage ode to the X-Men comics I loved when I was a kid. So it's all set during Pride Week here in Ottawa. So the whole story takes place over about 8 days. It's about a guy. He's telepathic and telekinetic. He's not very good at either. He mostly just practices with his cat, so he hasn't really put his effort behind it. But when he does use telekinesis, he also refracts light, so he creates rainbows. And he basically doesn't really want to be anybody special, but someone shows up at Pride Week who also has those abilities and is there to protest and break it. So he ends up sort of stepping forward and trying to be a hero, even though he doesn't know the slightest idea what he's doing.
So he's like a second-rate superhero.
Yeah, no, he has no concept of what he should be doing. Yeah, it was a lot of fun to write. And it is exactly its title. It's light, it's funny, it's a bit silly and fluffy, but that was also on purpose. I really, like, as much as I understand the place and the importance of darker literature or more serious literature, I think sometimes there's a dearth of queer characters who are just having fun. And that makes sense because we had, like, our lives are a little bit more difficult in many different ways, and we want to explore that. But sometimes I think it's fun for us just to have fun too.
And we have also Triad Blood, Triad Soul. Now, I sense a bit of a theme here. Am I correct?
Yeah, so those are the first two of a trilogy. I'm working on the third one now. They're a contemporary urban fantasy, so like a True Blood or a Dresden Files. It's our world, it's our Ottawa. Except there are wizards and demons and magic, and it sort of all hides behind the scenes. And it's about a group of three people. So the conceit of the world there, or my version of the world there, is until you have three, you're not considered safe from other forces, other supernatural forces. So you got three wizards, they'll band together and they become a coven and so forth. So instead, though, my three characters, all of whom are queer, decide that they don't like the people who are already in place. And it's one vampire, one demon, and one wizard decide that they're going to try to make their own little group, and it works. So the other groups have no choice but to respect them, but they really don't want to.
Gotcha. And we're having so much fun here. I forgot to tell everyone, my 17 listeners, that Nathan Burgoine is with us today here on Talking Books and Writing and Stuff, talking about books and writing. Nathan Burgoine, based in Ottawa, Lambda Literary Award finalist, lots of books. His current one is Of Echoes Born, which is a collection of short stories. There's also the Triad Blood, Triad Soul, and a third one coming out. And let me just read a bit from story one of Echoes Born, okay? This is me being you. The world shattered, people, the classrooms, even his own hands, no matter where Christian looked, he seemed to be staring through layer after layer of broken glass windows in a place without gravity. Triangles of the view shifted and rotated, coming in and out of focus, and the world didn't line up right behind them. It distorted everything along sharp lines, sometimes twisting, sometimes rotating, but always broken. Maybe he was dying. Maybe he was going mental. Either way, he was totally blowing off third period English. Now that cracked me up when I read that. So it's all serious and stuff, and then, oh, okay, I got it. We go in a completely different direction. At least that's what I took from that. So that cracked me up. So that's, in a nutshell, kind of your style, is that you go a little bit this way and then a little bit that way?
Yeah, so I'm a firm believer in, so when things get their worst, and when they do, I generally meet that with a laugh or a joke. So very often that comes through with my writing as well, that like I could let it plow me under, or I can sort of face it and go, well, this sucks, and let me crack a joke about that. Yeah. So that main character there is suffering his very first migraine, and I lived through that, the same sort of scenario where you just suddenly can't see and you're in all sorts of pain. And it happened to me actually in gym class, but I thought that was even a bit too cruel. So I made it happen to him just before English class instead. And he decided, well, screw that, I'm not going to class.
So there. Talking with Nathan Burgoine, rhymes with sirloin, he tells us. And you also state in your book, we don't inherit our stories. What do you mean by that?
So that goes back to what I was mentioning earlier. We're not born to queer people, right? So, and especially in my case, it wasn't like my parents were going to hand me stories about queer people who came before. Most parents, and this isn't malicious. I don't think it's malicious in the slightest, but not a lot of parents or a lot of families take the moment to consider or question whether or not their child is queer. It's just assumed to be that you're not until you state otherwise. So our schools don't really teach it. We don't really have this inherited connectability to queer history, to queer culture. We're just randomly seeded to random families. And then it's not until we come out that we can even start to go looking for other people that are like us. And part of that includes the fact that we don't even know what we don't know. So I don't know who came before. And if school doesn't teach me and my family isn't going to teach me, then how do I even go looking?
Right.
So
okay.
It's a symptom of queer culture. It's a little bit different. It's something that's, a lot of marginalized cultures, they at least have the inheritability of language and culture and stories and narratives, and we don't have access to that. on the same level. We have to go find it ourselves.
We're talking with Nathan Burgoine. Nathan, we're probably going to have to wrap it up a little bit here. Your books are available everywhere or in specialized shops and stores, or how does one find your work?
It should be available everywhere. I'm traditionally published through Bold Strokes Books out of New York. So the listing, Kobo, if you want ebooks, they're available pretty much on every platform. If you want physical books, they're carried in bookstores. You can order them online as well. It's always easiest to go straight to the publisher website or check out IndieBound. So you support your local brick and mortar, but they are available, yes.
And Nathan, you have an online presence, and I can't pronounce it. Maybe you can do it for me.
Oh, yes. So you can find me online at nathanburgoine.com. But my Twitter and other places, it's always usually Nathan Burgoine. But if it's not Nathan Burgoine, it's apostrophe N because of that little apostrophe I put in front of my name. Ah,
yes, apostrophe N. So it's apostrophe with an N at the .wordpress.com is what I have. That's super. Wow. What's next for you? Still working on your triad book number 3?
Yep, it's funny, you mentioned Of Echoes Born as my last, it's actually not. I released a YA novel very recently called Exit Plans for Teenage Freaks. So that is it. And now I'm back to working on the triad book.
Okay.
So yes, that's what's next.
Nathan Burgoine has been our guest here on Talking Books and Writing and Stuff. Nathan from Ottawa. And like we said, you can contact him at his website or various other online presences. Look for his books just about anywhere and everywhere. It's Nathan Burgoine, Burgoine, and Nathan with an apostrophe in front of it, just because he's one of those kind of guys, he's got to have something different out there. Nathan, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a great time.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.